this is somewhat of a novelty. We're on episode 14, which is the final episode of our series in association with the Royal Highland and Agricultural Society of Scotland. And it is the first one where we've done any significant face-to-face chatting. So it's nice, actually. We're obeying all of the relevant and current rules, but it's really nice to actually be able to look into people's eyes and have a proper conversation. So I'm joined once again by Alan Laidlaw, the Chief Executive of RHASS, and by Bill Gray, the Chairman. Gentlemen, 14 weeks has passed since we first had our discussions for the very first episode in this series. And at that point, obviously, cancellation of the Highland Show was extremely recent and feelings were raw. Bill, I'll perhaps come to you first. What's happened over those 14 weeks, first of all, in terms of your feelings and how they've kind of evolved and developed?
Thanks, Anna, and morning. Welcome to the marquee in our garden, so that's about as good as we can get, probably, for socially distant. Yeah, a lot's happened, actually, in a whole myriad of different ways, and you've covered so much good ground on your podcasts with things like the virtual show week that we had, and the DC Thomson P&J led Scottish Agricultural Show. So from that point of view, quite a lot's happened. You know, from a pretty horrible situation, there's been some quite bright spots along the way. Doesn't take away from the severity of the pandemic. Within the society, a lot's happened, obviously. Not much at Ingleston, because Ingleston went into lockdown pretty much straight away and hasn't actually reopened yet as an open site. I guess now, coming towards the end of that 14-week run of these podcasts, I'm starting to think a little bit about what the lockdown easing means for us and how we might buy into that. And it's really tough because I think I've said it before that we can make plans as much as we like, but ultimately, if the First Minister or one of her cohorts stands up on a Wednesday or a Thursday and says something, the landscape all of a sudden changes again, and what we might have planned suddenly becomes either not doable, and there's been a few cases of that where we've tried to set up one or two small events, equestrian particularly, and to be told that they're not going to be able to be viable. On the one hand, a lot of time. On the other hand, actually, we're a good bit further down the road in terms of what we think we might be able to do, but actually that's not clear at all.
In all seriousness, you have been as busy as you would have been had there been a show, taking care of the team and the staff. How did that go? These things are new to 2020. They're never going to replace the real thing, but they would never intend to or hope to. But how do you feel that it went?
I think for what it was, and you're absolutely right, nothing will replace that buzz that you get when the show's actually on and you're there in person. I think it went really well, actually. The RET team particularly put a fantastic virtual extravaganza together. The Scottish Farmers Champion of the Decade caught quite a bit of imagination, although it wasn't strictly part of that week, but it was all happening about that same time. Scottish Young Farmers and QMS obviously did things around about that week as well. We were able to run our Technical Innovation Awards. We had the best entry we've ever had, which I'm hoping will be repeated next year when we're hopefully back on site. Because you don't want to do it too well. You don't want to sort of say that, this is actually better than the norm, but it was great that we got that up and running, and I know that the people who entered that, we got a lot out of it. So I think a lot of good has come from it. I think the teams did a great job. The Scottish Online Agricultural Show caught the imagination. But I think the biggest thing from our point of view, and certainly for me personally, was the fact that the love of the show just erupted, I think, during that week. We'd all talked about the fact there wasn't going to be a show and how horrible it was going to be and all the rest of it. It wasn't until we hit that Thursday that the show would normally have started. My phone started ringing, social media went bonkers. And that carried on right the way through that week, and actually probably right the way on into the social media stuff that we did for the Online Agricultural Show, which was a couple of weeks later. And that hasn't stopped. And that's hugely heartening and humbling, really, for us, I think, just to realise, what the show means to people, and more importantly, what the lack of the show means to people, and the effect that that's had.
Alan, you'll have noticed this in particular. You need things like that in a time like this to keep morale up. amongst showgoers, people who were feeling sad on the Thursday of the show because they couldn't go, but also amongst your team. You know, they worked so hard for 12 months, and then this year there was no show. So they need things like the enormous support for RHET, for example, to kind of keep going and make them feel as enthused as ever. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely, Anna. I think Bill mentioned around the build-up around the time to the show. Normally, that we talk about a roller coaster, and in January, February, that roller coaster leaves the high spots, and we can scream and shout, and you know the show happens in June whether we like it or not, if we're ready. You know that happens, and this year it didn't. For me, through this period, to hear in other people's voices how much it means to them is a real highlight, you know, and different people's voices, whether it be Robert Taylor from Galbraith talking about how important it was for business.
We managed to get our foot in the door in a prime location behind the grandstand, and we would not miss the Highland Show for all the tea in China.
Or the Runciman family, which were a hoot and actually brought a real passion for the show and for showing and shows and farming and breeding together.
What's a kiss party, Rocket? After a big win at the Highland, what's the kissed party like?
The kissed party is just having drinks together within your breed, and you can get a blether, and you can criticise the judge, and you can
compliment the judge,
sympathise with the judge. The kiss parties keep the breeds together.
You know, to sit back and reflect on that during a time that we were frustrated was brilliant. To hear people saying, the Royal Highland Show means a lot to me. It means a lot to my family. It's a huge part of our lives, our business, or it's a huge part of our social piece, whatever it is. That truly humbling, I think, from that perspective.
I totally agree, Alan. And I think the other thing that highlighted that for me was that, RSABI had been running their #KeepTalking campaign for probably a month before that, leading up towards the show and actually focusing on the show. And then, you know, we offered them the sort of #Phone5 option for the week of the show and try and encourage people to phone each other. And I was blown away talking to people about how many people had actually picked that up. And actually it was an opportunity for them to engage with each other. The loss of opportunity for people to get together is the key thing, and that was probably of all the things. We took a massive financial hit for lack of income, etc., etc., etc. But in this current pandemic time, particularly, the lack of that opportunity to get together, I think, was probably the biggest miss of the lot.
I think you're dead right. And you know, we did an episode focused on the social connection of the show, but actually every episode has been about the social connection of the show, whether it's about equestrianism, whether it's about showing livestock, whether it's about business. Somebody in every episode has said it's about meeting people, it's about seeing people I perhaps don't see for a year. And I think RSABI and what you did to connect with that was phenomenal. I actually have an uncle who used to be a show director, and he was on over 40 people that he'd been phoning since the campaign. So people really took it to heart. But I think they needed to, because there were people at home who were feeling down and who needed that lift. And I think that's been really important.
Absolutely. One of our vice presidents actually, during one of the board meetings that we had, and we were talking about this very point, that, you know, that lack of getting together was such a thing that people were missing. And he said, actually, it's almost akin to grieving. And he said, you know, it's very difficult to make that sound sort of not severe, because, you know, obviously grief is a hugely big emotion. But actually there was an element of that people were just at a loss because the show wasn't there.
And I think, Bill, you're absolutely right there. From a membership perspective, people can take things for granted. You've been a life member for the Society for 40 years. You've been to the show, you know, you've only missed one or whatever. And it's only when it's not there, and it's only when regional shows are not there and the opportunity to catch up informally, that you start looking around saying, hey, that third week in June is really important to me, to myself, to the family, to the business. And I miss it. And that means a lot to me. And I think, you know, we know how important the show is to people when we hear it anecdotally, but to hear that regularly, and so regularly as we have done over the last couple of weeks in particular, really reminds us why we do what we do, why the Society was founded, why it's important that we support rural Scotland in every way that we can, whether that's a Nuffield Scholar or, you know, the showing of livestock or the Technical Innovation Awards. And we want to make sure that in 230 years' time, whatever it looks like, the podcast equivalent of the day has somebody like Monty asking somebody like Bill, what do you think you guys in 2020 would think of this? That's my job, to work with the board, is to make sure that we are sustainable going forward. And Bill's touched on our losses. It's been a really tough year. We're not going to have an easy spell for the next wee while, and there's never been a better time to sort of get in behind us.
So to put it bluntly, Alan, if somebody's listening, what can they do to support the society? They'll hopefully come along to the show next year, and we'll talk about what the show might look like in 2021. But what can they actually do right now to contribute and to make sure that the Highland Society remains as strong as ever?
It's a really good question, and I think we're working on a fundraising campaign. In the past, the Society has managed its own resources through different means, and we've tended to fundraise to buy cattle stalls for the new Highland Hall in the early 2000s, or for fundraising for the new members building. We're going to have to become a more regular fundraising organisation for the next wee while, and we can't be bashful about that. We've got a lot of debt now that we would rather not have in terms of what's happened in COVID, and we would want to be able to fundraise to allow us to continue those activities, to allow us to support RSABI, to allow us to support young farmers and Nuffield scholars, and to really put money back into RHET and to develop there. Because actually, a lot of people are talking about what the crisis has done for farming, and it has made people realise where their food comes from. It has made people realise how much they value their outdoor spaces, the wild landscapes of Scotland, tourism and things like that. And the society and agriculture in rural Scotland is so important to all those. So we will be fundraising, and we will be asking for members to support us. We will be asking the public, who probably have just turned up to the show, to help us as well, and to think about how much they value that, and to help us make sure that we've got all the opportunities, restrictions prevailing next year, to put on a barnstorming Royal Highland Show in 2021.
I think we've been trying to highlight as much as we can that it's not just about the 4 days of the show. We are a large charity. We have a charter which requires us to carry out charitable work. Any charity will fundraise. My last soundbite, I think, on the end of my last podcast was, as somebody said once, if you had more to give, would you give more? Well, the answer obviously is yes. At the moment, we need some assistance because we're on a harder time. We've got challenges ahead. Alan mentioned that, the perfect storm arrived with all the infrastructure work that we've done with the new members pavilion that we've built. We had a programme of seeing how that would pan out over the next wee while and return us to surplus. And then the pandemic comes along, and all of a sudden the perfect storm arrives, and we're left in a difficult situation at the moment.
From my perspective, Anna, it's about us being honest around that. So lots of people are interested in the reporting of the annual results and things, and we are going to make a substantial loss this year. And as Bill said, with more we can do more. That is about people thinking about if they can help and donate or support or sponsor, because ultimately, that feeling of loss around the show, we don't want there to be any risk on future shows. We want, as long as COVID is allowing us to do what we want to do, we want to do as much as we possibly can. But next year there might be some restrictions in place that means it's more difficult to do, or there's more costs involved in the Royal Highland Show. We're just being honest about that with more financial resources the Society can recover faster, do more, and have a greater impact for all of our members in rural Scotland. And I think there's an opportunity at the back of COVID, once we're past the worst, for rural Scotland to bounce really forward from this and to recover. But to do that, it has to have good organisations, and RHASS is one of those organisations that quietly helps other organisations, whether financially, with networks, with facilities at Ingliston, with the Royal Highland Show as an opportunity for them to come together, or a place for AgriScot to happen. And all these things need to be supported as a web. We all work together, and we all do that quietly. And I think now's the time for RHASS to be reasonably bold about say, we have an impact on lots of different organisations in Scotland, and we want to continue that impact to be as high as possible. And
that's just got me thinking, actually, because in last week's episode we heard from Lorraine, who is one of the staff members at RSABI. Obviously she was reminding everybody that That helpline is part funded by RHASS, which some people maybe don't know or didn't know until now. And she was also saying that the calls that they put out, so they will phone people who are perhaps feeling lonely or just in need of a chat, or somebody just to give them a call each day and make sure they're up and about and getting on with the day-to-day business. And those calls that they're putting out have doubled since COVID.
I'd say a lot of the calls have been emotional, though. People have suffered bereavement during COVID, and they can't really see their family and attend funerals. Or with lockdown, there's been a lot of